Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here the third time at the Fast Forward conferences. It's very nice to meet old connections and also to meet to build new ones, let's say. So thank you very much to the organizers for accepting my proposal, and especially Anna, Maria, and Katarzyna, and Martina, and all the others that I'm sure have supported to gather all us here. So this paper grows out of the need to clarify a theoretical note that has accompanied my reflections on photography and feminism for quite some time. Like all notes that shape and at the same time define the limits of our ways of thinking and acting, it is something that I have struggled to formulate and to really put to work. This note concerns the meaning and role of aesthetics, understood in the specific sense of philosophical discipline, within the broader discussion on the relationship between photographic images and feminist practices. So before I could even ask whether a particularly aesthetic approach might be useful for this kind of research, I first had to define my own position working within, or perhaps more accurately, at the margins of what we call aesthetics as a philosophical discipline. I want to stress this perspective because, at least in the Italian context, most of the studies on the 1970s and on the feminist movement and have taken mainly historical or documentary approach. These works have done crucial work in tracing the complex genealogies, figures, and political contexts that shaped the experiences of the first feminist groups, 1970s feminist groups in Italy, such as, for instance, Rivolta.Femminile. My own contribution today, while really deeply in depth to this important body of research, historical and documentary, moves in a different direction. Rather than reconstructing the paths and threads of Rivolta.Femminile's images in historical terms, I aim to explore the theoretical possibilities their analysis opens up for thinking the relations between temporality, memory, and feminist subjectivity from a political aesthetic point of view. From this point of view, I take the idea of the future perfect as the temporal mode of the image. It offers a way to reread, to look again at the photographs produced and circulating within Rivolta.Femminile, and also to reflect on their current preservation in archives. These photographs are not just documents of past moment. They are images that, in a sense, know more than the subjects they portray knew about themselves when the picture was taken. They anticipate, in this sense, they prefigure, and they help to build possible futures. And this will be the core of my paper, to be clarified also. In this perspective, my paper focuses on two main lines of inquiry. The first looks at the role of photographic images in the text of Rivolta.Femminile, and the second explores how the forms of subjectivity and temporality that emerge from those images relate to the ways in which the memory of the 1970s Italian feminism has been organized, and more specifically through its archives. To stay within the time available to each of us, I'll focus in the first part on a single book by Carla Lonzi, one of the founders of Rivolta.Femminile, her diary, published in the 1978, entitled "Shut Up or Rather Speak: Diary of a Feminist." But let me just mention in passing that the use of images and especially of photographs in groups publications was not limited to Lonzi. And on this slide, for example, you can see two images from Maria Grazia Chinese's La strada più lunga, so the longest path, dating 1976. So this is the title in Italian of the diary, Taci anzi parla, shut up or rather speak, diary of a feminist. And analyzing this diary, it's quite easy to recognize that writing as medium holds a clear primacy in Carla Lonzi's work as her main form of self-expression. But the diary also shows a constant reflection on other media, and above all cinema, which Lonzi mentions when she describes some of her creative projects, that many of them are never realized. Closely connected to these projects, each of them are linked to the expression of consciousness raising. There is also in the diary another kind of relationship with the visual. These are not just images evoked by words, but actual photographs, as you can see from the slide. They are 34 in total, and they punctuate the passage from one year to the next, from the 1972 to the 1977, yet they do not belong only to those specific years. They actually retrace Lonzi's whole life from her childhood, as you can see from the screen, up to the period when the diary ends with the last photograph dating 1976. Actually, I made some mistakes in the presentation and I missed the last photographs, so I apologize for that. These are the photographs of the 50s and the 60s, and the other one, of course, were about the childhood. As you can easily see, all the photographs show Carla Lonzi herself and come from her personal or family collections. In the way they are rearranged in the diary, they once again take the form of another album. So this memorial device, the album, becomes the main framework for understanding their meaning in the book. As we all know here, the family album, and especially the conventional form of the portrait, we discussed about that in the previous panel, of the portrait it contains, is always caught in a double code. On the one side, portraits in the family album seem to celebrate the self, what is unique and singular in our features and physiognomy. But on the other, actually, the traditional family portrait returns us to ourselves as other, reflecting the social role that we embody. In the diary, what we find is an album made up of fragments from other collections, so from other albums. So it becomes important, or for me has been important to ask myself, what kind of memory does this transfer and reuse rely on? Or in other words, what is the role of these photographs? Which role this photograph play in the diary in itself related to memory? My reply is that Lonzi includes them both here and also in her other writings, not as a sign of closeness to lived experience, but as moments of her own identity to which she comes back again and again, as if they carry a form of self-consciousness which is still buried and not yet unfolded. So even if not yet acknowledged or fully recognizable, these moments already mark stages in a path that leads to a possible crack in the social role they themselves stage as images in a family album. This is a very crucial point because the crack produces something unexpected. So the beginning of a transformation of the self through the process of self-consciousness. So the idea of this particular optical unconscious becomes explicit, at least in one single photograph, become explicit for Lonzi in at least one single photograph, the image that you can see on the slide, an image of Carla Lonzi taken by her partner, the artist Pietro Consagra, at the International Fair of San Antonio, Texas in 1968. It later became also this photograph one of the best known and most often reproduced portraits of her. In the diary, Lonzi writes that she chose to include this exact image of herself in another book by her titled Autoritratto, Self-Portrait, because she recognized in it the smile of the unrecognized authenticity of herself. So in this framework, I read The Future Perfect as the privileged time of these images from Rivolta.Femminile, not the past, not a past event already completed, but what will have been, something the image anticipates and that only later, through the consciousness raising, becomes understandable in its transformative sense. In short, the future perfect in these photographs is not just a grammatical metaphor. It names their political and temporal potential, a latency that becomes legible after the fact through feminist practice. In this sense, the optical unconscious and the self-consciousness meet in the work of the image, where seeing these images is at once an act of remembering and an act of becoming. In my research, I'm trying to understand whether and how the kind of temporality expressed by the images that I discuss in the first part of this paper is connected at a theoretical level to the reflections on feminism on internal temporality, and from there to its processes of historization and memorialization, of which, of course, archives are also an essential part. As for the Italian context, the feminist movement of the 1970s marks also the beginning of reflection on the construction of women's historical memory, not only feminist historical memory, but women's historical memory, and thus on the elaboration of archives as instruments of self-representation and self-historicization. From the outset, this memory was conceived as non-linear memory. Conceptually, and here I'm specifically drawing again on Carla Lonzi, feminism, Carla Lonzi wrote, has no past to rely upon. Women's oppression is literally, according to her, historically irrecoverable because it's lost in the dark past of the world. These are exactly Lonzi's quotation. Women's history is therefore marked by an originary amnesia. This is an expression used by the Italian historian Luisa Passerini, which also, of course, weighs on feminist archival practices that are from the very beginning certainly conceived not from the perspective of a cumulative and linear image of memory. In addition to this concept of amnesia, is linked Lonzi's further idea of the now as the constitutive tense of feminist history. So it is the punctual present that describes to a temporal level the gestures that erases previous experiences in order to respond to a need for an innovative rupture, breaking the monologue of patriarchal history and connecting with the future. Among many examples of this position, it is very well expressed. It is very well expressed in a brief text written in 1970 and issued in the feminist anthology you see on the slide, and which is signed only with the first name Serena. It is exciting to be able to remake history before it waited on me as the inevitable already happened, boring, dead, fixed, absurd, and useless. Now it feels like our history. It does not even seem past to me. It seems all future, end quote. Of this our history, we must recognize and valorize the fact that it is built also and actually above all on perishable and non-monumental traces, on what Lonzi called gestures made of air. In a page of her diary dated August 1974, Lonzi writes, "Again, I feel like making small films on gestures of women who provide for the sustenance of humanity, cleaning up, caring for children, for the sick, etc. The title is Female Culture of Humanity Sustenance. Becoming aware of its value, and not only practical but also cultural value, and we have discussed about value earlier, can be a way to understand who we are and where we come from. I would like to film the gestures to highlight the expertise and the plotting of experience they require. I would like to film those that do not become a product, but only a care. Gestures in the air, like the ones of acrobats, gestures made of air. Our life is built on these gestures which have no following." So it is precisely these traces, these gestures, which only, again, retrospectively, we can grasp, and only retrospectively through the experience of feminism, and they become exactly like that, recognizable as part of history. It's precisely this gesture that we have to recover, and this is the difficulties, especially for the archives of this kind of history. Thus, in the 1980s and 1990s in Italy, a debate arose on how to write women's history, starting exactly from the consideration of their subjectivity, that is, without eluding the perishable elements that constitute its very fabric, the very fabric of our history. This debate was closely intertwined with reflections on documentary practice, the collection, preservation, and reordering of the documentation of the feminist movement. In many, many Italian cities during those years, archives of the movement were established, more precisely called back then documentation centers, which also became places for elaborating both archival techniques suitable for constructing this kind of memory, the memory of women's movement, and also methodologies for researching and valorizing this type of new sources. Among the many projects of those years, I will mention only, for the sake of the time, also one single case study, this Linguaggio Donna. I left the title in Italian, created within the Centro di Studi Storici sul Movimento di Liberazione della Donna, so the national, Center for Historical Studies on Women Liberation Movement, which is called today Fondazione Badaracco in Milan, and this Fondazione Badaracco has also a lot of photographs from Rivolta.Femminile. This is Linguaggio Donna, is a thesaurus built from the lexicon, so a completely different way of proceeding in archiving historical sources, because it's a new lexicon of feminist documents produced between 1965 and 1989. This lexicon is not an adaptation of existing library or archival tools, but is a completely new vocabulary that arises and is creating from the very words used by women in their text and political practices. So, and I conclude with that, the passage from the visibility in the image to the visualized memory concerns not merely the act of ordering materials, but the transformation of their very function. In Lonzi's pages, photography appears as a fragment of an unexpressed past, something that shows in retrospect what will have been. The Feminist Archives is the place where this latency, exactly this latency, built on gestures made of air, becomes legible and thinkable as a shared history, and from there open to collective interpretation. What happens from the images in the text to the archive is not a simple shift in scale, of course, even if they are connected, but is a qualitative one. The visualization of women's subjectivity, the fabric of fragile, unacknowledged traces that makes up our history, takes shape and should actually take shape through new methods, strategies, and tools for describing and organizing new sources. Thank you very much.